I'm Eleanor Nickel, and I'm the chair of the English department and the Humanities division here at Fresno Pacific University. So for the grant, I decided to create an entirely new class called Hispanic Literature of the United States. So this is literature written in English by Americans of Hispanic descent. And the idea is that will go in the English major, English minor, Spanish major as an elective, hopefully, and then eventually the Latin American Studies minor. Well, first of all, the grant just inspired me to do it, right? I probably would never have thought of having a whole course on Hispanic literature. We don't have other courses that are just one ethnic group. But the grant inspired me to do it because I realized that with almost half of our student body being Hispanic, it actually was justified to have a whole class just on that one thing, which I think sometimes we're a little bit hesitant to do that, but I thought, you know, we really could have an entire class just on this one. The name of the grant, ALAS, A-L-A-S, Advancing Latino Academic Success, right? And it means wings in Spanish. So my understanding of it is that we are trying to embed, truly incorporate into courses, existing courses and new courses, content that would help all students, not just Hispanic students, understand Hispanic heritage. So that would include the Spanish language, cultural history, games and dances and costumes and foods, as well as literature, history, politics, all of those things. And I think the embedded part is trying to put it into classes in a way that makes sense and is fitting with the class so that it's not just thrown in there randomly, here's a week of suddenly random Hispanic content, but that it actually flows in with everything else that will be part of the class. It's been really fun to see how people from different disciplines are incorporating things into their classes. So today we did sample lesson plans, and we heard from an education professor who is teaching a certain theory of education using a Hispanic undocumented person's story as an example. We heard from history people about how they might teach Latin American revolutions using some of the new technology that we were shown. And we talked about early childhood education and using a picture book and having students comment on the picture book. And my partner was the Folklorico dance class. So we worked on Folklorico today and the different regions of Folklorico and stuff like that. So the summit has been really helpful because you see across the range of disciplines how you might use it in dance, philosophy, film, education, history, social work, early childhood development. So you can't do that just by yourself. You'd need to be with other professors in order to see that. A definition of culturally embedded curriculum would be content and artifacts from the culture, the target culture, which in this case is primarily Hispanic, that is truly integrated into a course in a way that feels seamless and logical to students. So a wide range of artifacts, ideally not just text, not just a book or an article, but a range of experiences, images, videos, songs that would be, again, integrated carefully and logically rather than just slapped on. Yes, I think a huge part of this that is the benefit is the instructor is just learning a lot more than we already knew. And I remember some of the very early conversations that we had about the grant when we hadn't even received the grant yet. We talked about our lack of knowledge. So I myself am a perfect example of this. I have never been to Latin America, any part of Latin America, ever. Not Mexico, not Tijuana, not any place. And I don't speak really any Spanish, hardly any Spanish. And there was some statistic I remember that we looked at about college professors in the United States and how few of them have ever been to Latin America or have ever spoken Spanish, right? So you have a bunch of professors that are just not trained and we have no idea. And so there's a huge gap between the student's experience in life, family experience, personal experience, and then my knowledge of that experience. I'm completely clueless. I have no idea. So like I did a lesson for the summit on loteria, and this would be something that many of my students would be very familiar with, but I had no idea it existed at all. So there's no opportunity for me to make a connection to that student unless I know a little bit about it. So I think even if we don't end up teaching everything that we learn, the more that we learn, the better. So the Spanish conversation classes that you're having for staff and faculty, just for them to learn some Spanish is incredibly important too. So it's us as people just being more informed, I think, and I'm a good example of that. I went back and looked at my graduate comprehensive exams book list, and it was 20th century American literature, right? And I counted how many books were Hispanic from this list. And it was over 100 books. I think it was 115 books, and there was one Hispanic text on that list. And this was in 1999. So it's not like a long, long time ago. And that was not a big part of my education, honestly. We didn't study that kind of stuff a lot of the time. And so there's the huge gap of knowledge that professors across the United States have. And as we have more and more of our population is Hispanic, the numbers rising all the time, right? We're just not going to be able to relate. And we spend so much time thinking about like millennial students and trying to relate to them and what are they interested in and what do they know about. And I try to read the books that they read. And like, I need to understand what their favorite book is and all this stuff. And I work so hard at that. But this is kind of like that, right? Like, it's not just that they're 18 and I have to do some work in order to understand what it's like to be 18, but they're also coming from a Hispanic tradition that I am totally unaware of. I think it will. I was teaching this last semester 20th century American literature, so just the standard survey class, and we had one Hispanic author. So I was teaching Judith Ortiz Cofer, and I mentioned, as we were talking about her, that I was developing this class. So I was saying to them, oh, you know, there's going to be this class in Hispanic literature, and I'm going to use her memoir in that class. And the students were so excited. And then I said, oh, but it's going to be in 2 years, because I kind of didn't mention that part. And so then when I said it's going to be in 2 years, you should have seen how disappointed they were that they weren't going to be able to take that class, because they're already upper division students. So I was really surprised that they lit up when they knew about that class. So I think it will make a huge difference for them to be able to take entire courses that just focus on their culture. I really do. I think just to have me up there in my class this spring saying, yeah, you know, I'm learning more about this and that. And somebody mentioned the movie Selena, a particular scene from that movie. And I said, I just saw that movie 3 days ago because I had just been studying that movie. So we had this whole conversation in class about the movie and that particular scene of Selena. I think every student who grows up in the Valley knows that movie. And I had never seen it until 3 days before the moment that my student brought it up. So then instead of being like, oh, great, I've never seen that movie, I was able to say, oh, yeah, that scene, I remember that scene. And we had this whole discussion. So it already was paying off for me that I knew the movie that she was referring to. That was a huge deal. I've had a wonderful time creating my class. It's been the most fun I've had in a long time. I just have had so much enjoyment out of it, just researching different authors. And I was trying to find one really good video of each author that I'm teaching, and sometimes that can be hard. But just watching a lot of videos and trying to find the right ones and coming up with games. I came up with all these different games to play and stuff. So it's been really enjoyable, and I really hope that other faculty, I know many faculty are planning to apply in the future years. I hope they do, because I think for me it's been energizing and fun, and it just kind of got me out of the boring world that I usually live in and gave me a chance to do something totally different, and we don't get very many chances to do that. So it's been great. I mean, I wish I could say to the Title V people, this is what I've experienced, because it's worth it. Like the money that the government is putting into this, which is a lot of money, I think this is a really good use of my taxpayer dollars, because seriously, like, were there 82 grants that were given or whatever? Like, all across the country, they're pouring millions of dollars into this, but I totally agree with it. I think that you've got to educate the college professors in this country on these things, or else we're gonna have an increasing gap between the student and the professor that's even worse than the one that we naturally have because of our ages. There's always going to be the age gap, and that's a huge deal. Just trying to overcome that. But if you have a gap between the cultures of the instructors too, it's just very hard to relate to students. And so I think it's money well spent. I would love to say to the federal government who put this together, it's working for me. I think it's been what I think they would hope to see in an instructor that gets fired up about this kind of content.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you very much. much for talking to us.
Thank you, Gina.
It's been great. We used a bunch of different tools, online tools, to develop culturally embedded curriculum courses with Latin American studies. And probably the most useful part of it was actually hearing other ideas that faculty and staff members had for different types of content that could be employed in the classroom. So whether it be films or novels or historical works, that was the most useful thing. The culturally embedded curriculum is coming out of a desire. I teach a modern world history survey course, the History 140 honors class, and it's coming out of a desire to actually better represent the global experience of not only the students, but what has happened in the world. And so the desire is to better connect Latin America to that global story, and North America, depending on how you categorize Mexico, but connect it more firmly to that story, and to move beyond just the revolutions that come out of the fall of the Spanish and kind of the transformation of the Portuguese Empire, and to look at the development of those nation states that come out of that period more thoroughly, and to better understand what different countries were trying to accomplish as they changed their politics, their culture, their ideas about themselves and their identity. Yeah, so I mean, obviously Latin American studies is a rich scholarly field. There's plenty to draw on in terms of secondary literature from a variety of scholars. And then I'm also trying to incorporate things that are available online. So there's different databases that have published, things that are in the kind of the public domain, or treaties, or various accounts that would be useful to help students connect to that story. So using lots of primary sources, as well as novels and poems and films, and what other resources are available out there. I heard about the grant initially through our dean, Dr. Ron Herms, and I thought about it for actually a couple of months because the announcement had not been made yet for the grant, and I knew it was coming. I was trying to think about how I teach the world history course and the modern world history course, and to contemplate, what more can I do to better incorporate Latin America in that course. And so obviously, given that FPU is an HSI institution, I was also thinking about the students in the classroom, whether they have a Hispanic background or not, but to better understand this hemisphere outside of simply North America. So the United States and Canada is where most people tend to think, and to create a bigger picture for everybody involved, including myself. And so as I was thinking about that, I thought, the class to start with is the honors class. It's part of the Gen Ed requirements, and it's a place to connect our students, but also this narrative to something that all of them have to go through in the general ed, right? They all have to take this part of the Civ series. And so that's why I chose that class, and that was my thinking as I went through and wrote up for the grant. So what I did, pretty simply, was I realized that I only had 6% of the curriculum in the 140 honors course that was devoted to Latin America. And the grant asked to increase that to 12 to 15%, and that's what I'm working on, is expanding it. So looking at the development of these nation states, and also the influence of culture and religion and lots of other things, and really extending beyond the mid-19th century and looking at the 20th century. So things like the Mexican Revolution, the rise of Marxist groups in the later part of the 20th century in various Latin American nations, and also the rise of something like liberation theology within the context of the Catholic Church, and evangelicals, or the rise of Protestantism in Latin America as well. Yes, definitely. And I don't know what all the plans and visions are for things, but I hope that this course is able to be incorporated as an LAS course, especially for the honor students. It would be wonderful for them to have maybe even a special track in Latin American studies, and hopefully this is kind of the start of something like that as they work through their specified honors courses. I don't know that I have a worked out definition, and I think that's what we were doing in that room, was trying to figure out exactly what it means. In my thinking right now, and based on some of the comments that were made in the room, part of it has to do with the self-construction of identity. And I think that is somewhat useful. I think it's, as a historian, I think a little bit differently about it, rather than it being what I profess myself to be, but being also part of a context in which really I don't always fully understand, right? We live in different moments and times, and we don't always understand where we fit in those places. And even when we come to self-awareness, it might not actually be accurate to our place in time. It might just be our perception of things. So I am, at this point, seeing it as a way to connect the history and the historical context and the choices people made in particular times and places in Latin America with the ongoing story of the world, and kind of, kind of to tie together all the interconnections that persist, that are global, and yet at the same time are the anthropological term would probably be indigenized, but I'm not sure that that's even what I mean, but adapted and modified and utilized in different places outside of where they originated. So, like with the case of Marxism, its reapplication in the Latin American context, or with democracy and its application in the Latin American context. So, and then putting those stories into the broader story of all of us, which is what the World Civ series tries to do. It's a human story, and so it isn't just simply one group story. It's all of our stories, and it's very easy to see that in the modern world today, the way economics and trade and culture move. So I'm still working on a definition for culturally embedded curriculum, but what my thinking is that it is actually trying to draw us all together into a better understanding of how we have interacted together and relied on one another as human beings across different regions of the world. Yeah. Thank you, Gina. I know you've put a tremendous amount of work into this, and I've appreciated it. As I'm excited about the opportunities. I think it's a great program for our students, and I think it will serve the students of FPU extremely well, and hopefully get us all to better understand how much culture and history and social practices and legal practices and all of that contribute to who we are and where we fit in the world today.
Thank you very much.
I am Dr. Nathan Carson, Assistant Professor of Philosophy at Fresno Pacific University, and also Program Director of Philosophy at Fresno Pacific University, and I mainly teach in traditional undergraduate programs here on the main campus. I teach general education, introduction to philosophy course, and the course is built in such a way that it has sort of movable components where I can pull parts out and put new parts in without changing the other parts necessarily very much. So when the Title V grant came available, I thought, well, this would be a neat chance to revise the course, learn a little bit more about Latin American philosophy in general, and then all of the different philosophical ideas and streams of thought and practice that are going on in Mexico and all throughout South and Central America, and it's very diverse. So my goal is to take about 20% of the course. So the course is designed in kind of 5 modules. So just take one of those out and insert 1 or 2 really influential Latin American or Hispanic philosophers, and then have them sort of raise a variety of philosophical issues that will be in conversation with other thinkers we're working with in the class. We have a lot of students from a lot of Hispanic students. I have a lot of students from different parts of Latin America. I would say most of our students are of Hispanic origin, sort of right across the border in Mexico. But I've noticed that there's a disconnect between teaching traditional sort of Western figures in philosophy. Usually they're white, usually male, a disconnect on a number of levels with my Hispanic students. In fact, the first semester I was here, I noticed that some of the lowest grades in the class were from Hispanic females. 5 of them failed the course, and I couldn't understand why. And so I started doing more, asking more questions. And there's a need to teach figures that students can identify with, because in philosophy the concepts are pretty difficult as it is, and so you have to find ways of building intrinsic motivational dimensions into things, whether it's through film or literature, or sort of integrating the elements that kind of get students on board, or by giving them someone that they can relate to. I had one of my very first philosophy minors after I came to Fresno Pacific. She went on to a summer institute called Philosophy in an Inclusive Key at Penn State last summer. And she came back and said, "You need some Hispanic philosophers, you need female philosophers in your class." And she was exposed to a whole bunch of folks that she was very excited and passionate about, especially folks that are associated with feminist philosophy in Latin America and liberation theology and philosophy as well. So she was very excited about these things and thought, how could you exclude some of these voices from your class, because they need to be heard. And so she's been and she immigrated here when she was only 12 years old, and so she was another person who sort of had this on the radar for me as far as needing to change, even before the Title V opportunities came along. So just to give you an idea, I mean, there's a presupposed cultural, or set of cultures, I should say, that are inherited by most of our students of Anglo-European descent, that automatically have some familiarity with philosophical theories or figures in the Western tradition. And there's automatically also a kind of disconnect for students who don't really come from that tradition, or who don't have that same set of cultural, I don't know what you would call them. There's a kind of a popularized collection of understandings that Anglo-European type folks have with respect to different philosophical issues and figures, and you can really use that to your advantage in the classroom when trying to teach them a little bit more rigorous philosophical work. A lot of that is kind of missing for our Hispanic students, and we have so many of them. And so as one of the recent sort of leading figures in Latin American philosophy in my discipline and the American Philosophical Association once suggested that there's a kind of basic cultural familiarity with philosophical issues and thinkers that Anglo-European descendant folks have that Hispanic students do not. And so we need to sort of find a way to shore up those deficiencies that allow people to map onto the ideas and issues and theories better. And so yes, I think this will help. But I mean, we have to understand that, you know, in my case, we read, you know, when I'm teaching broadly across things that I'm not a specialist in, I had to read about 8,000 pages of philosophers across the history of philosophy. And not a single one of those was Hispanic or Latin American philosopher. Miguel de Unamuno may be one exception, but it was, you know, 100 pages out of 8,000. So most folks coming out of graduate schools and PhD programs in philosophy just have no idea where to even begin, and it's not on the radar. They don't know what it is, don't know how to teach it, so it doesn't get taught. Yes, very much. So just like anyone else, you need time to do things, and when there's money, it creates time to sit down and read what's the current state of the field in Latin American Hispanic philosophy. What are some of the key debates going on? Who are some of the focal figures? Among those figures, which ones are my students here most likely to connect with? You know, as a sort of a politically conservative Argentinian writer from mid-20th century, would that be better? Or a Mexican, female Mexican metaphysician that is still writing today? And so all those decisions, it takes a lot of time and effort to sift through what would be most effective and why, and how to put some of these thinkers in conversation with folks from the more Western or Eurocentric canon, without sort of reducing thinkers or theories to one another. You know, I actually brought a fancy report from the group I'll be working with. It's their annual report, but it's so nicely done that I thought I'd bring it along. I'm going to the island of Oahu in Hawaii to work with Partners in Development Foundation. And what they work on is culturally embedded curriculum with at-risk youth, with younger children in, from preschool on up to 6th grade. They work with fathers who come out of prison and reconnecting them with their families and learning with their kids to build relationship and growth and job skills. And we had a speaker named Danny Goya come here to Fresno Pacific University in, was it January, February? Yes. And I was so impressed by his presentation of how they integrate sort of traditional cultural, really integrate traditional cultural values and practices into their curriculum, that with a curriculum that's designed to actually be forward-looking in terms of job skills and technology, and revitalizing of some of the poorest neighborhoods in Hawaii. How they sort of are able to sort of walk the tension between retrieving these traditions of the past while also looking forward. So some of the programs that I'm going to go and learn from include, let me just flip through a few. Here's some of the values they talk about: aloha, pono, lokahi, malama, and others. These are sort of traditional virtue concepts or values that they talk about quite a bit. And there's a cultural heritage there that really lights their students up on the inside. So for instance, they have an at-risk youth program for teenagers where the state average of retention is somewhere around 24%, and theirs is close to 90%. And most of their teaching and group work is centered around these kinds of traditional virtue value Hawaiian concepts that these at-risk youth really latch onto. They have Tutu and Me is another program where they learn about the value of grandparents and story and memory, and connecting students with their sort of cultural heritage and identity through spending time with grandparents and learning from the elders, as they say. And then they also have this is very important too, this will be the last one, Pili'apa'a program, where they have a number of teachers in the school districts from around the state who come and do intensive, multiple week-long seminars on how to embed traditional Hawaiian values into their curriculum in the classroom. So I'll be meeting with 5 or 6 curriculum specialists, the president of the foundation, some of the folks working with the youth and the preschool age kids. I won't get to do one of these intensive seminars because they won't be happening when I'm there, but I will get to meet with all the curriculum specialists that design these programs, and then try to sort of think about, what would it mean to take some of the formal culturally embedded ideas that they have and make them actually contextually appropriate for Fresno Pacific and our Hispanic student population here. Yes, they are, culturally there's a lot of difference there, but there are some structural similarities to what they're doing. And so one of the issues is that on the leeward coast of Oahu, on the west coast, it's extremely impoverished, shockingly impoverished. You drive past these sort of fancy hotels, the Disney resort there, for instance, and pretty soon you're looking at people living in shacks and tent cities on the beach, children that don't go to school, people living in extreme poverty. And and also with the deep sense of pride over their cultural traditions and such. But this foundation is working on how to actually reach these people and give them skills and education, but also deepening their sense of identity and the value they have for traditions of the past, and giving them a kind of cultural coherence as a people group, without it being a sort of imperialistically sort of imposed top-down. And in fact, one of the program directors for them, Danny Goya, mentioned to me that they don't like researchers coming in a lot because they come in and treat the people like a specimen to be examined and to gather facts that they can then put into their data and their research projects. And so he appreciated my approach in wanting to come alongside and learn from the people, learn from him, look at how these sort of traditional values actually play a role in developing these programs. And I think that that's really important for students here in the Central Valley context too. There's a lot of poverty and economic difficulty around the valley. There's remnants of sort of a sense of older traditions that have been inherited by some of our students, but they don't know fully how to articulate some of those values or traditions. And so giving those things names and voices, and then working on community outreach projects that sort of connects the work of the university with the community is really important, it's really valuable. I'm excited to learn about more about Hispanic and Latin American philosophy. It's a very new set of things for me to read. But I'm also interested in learning a bit more about pedagogical practices that are sort of culturally attuned or sensitive to the student population. I don't think that's something that I have ever done much very well, partly because I'm a new faculty member preparing new classes left and right, and it's all about developing content. Well, I'm a little bit past that point now, and so I'm excited to actually focus on the way in which the class is carried out. And so I'm not sure how to learn, not just culturally embedded curriculum, but culturally embedded or attuned pedagogical methods. Is there really a difference with how one, well, there are differences even just with how one teaches, folks of European or Anglo descent in terms of male and female in the classroom. Male Americans are much more likely to volunteer their opinion individually in front of others. Females don't do that. They start talking the minute you get them into small groups facing each other. But if you just treat it as a large group, they won't do that. And so I know there's things associated with even American Anglo-European descent folks. There are statistics and pedagogical methods associated with how to get them comfortable with the material and with each other. And so I don't know much beyond that, and I want to learn. What kinds of methods really do connect with first-generation college-going students of Latin American or Hispanic descent. What does that look like? And how can I use my body and classroom space and collaborative work or individual work more effectively in the classroom in light of some of those things? So I'm still working on those, on the pedagogical aspect of it. But
that's perfect. That's wonderful. So thank you very much, Nathan, for your time.
Thank you, Gina.
And good luck. And enjoy your
Thanks.
trip to Hawaii.
All right. Thank you.